I'm almost like so interested in making stuff. I always struggle with the actual release because the release part is so boring to me.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe if it's a Bandcamp release, it feels a little bit less.
You need an assistant. You need someone that can handle all this stuff for you.
That would be great.
If anyone out there wants to be Luke's intern, I'm not sure.
The pay is terrible.
I'm not sure what you can pay you, but we'll figure something out. Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Signal Flow, the Signal Sounds podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tom Churchill, and I'm joined as ever by
Luke Palmer.
Hello, Luke.
Hello, Tom.
And hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in again to another episode. This week, we don't have a guest, and we're not at Super Booth, but hopefully we'll still manage to keep your interest.
Back to the regularly scheduled programming.
Indeed, back to a regular, normal format podcast. We've got a few things to talk about. We've got a few new bits of gear that have come in. We've got a few topics and a couple of your questions that you've sent us in that we're going to go through.
Please keep those coming.
Yes, signalflow@signalsounds.com. Or leave a comment. And let's just get into it. Luke, how the devil are you? What have you been up to?
Oh, I'm all right. I am not too shabby. I have been working away on some stuff. At the moment, I am currently in the middle of scoring a film, which I am enjoying very much. It's a nice sort of tonal change from the stuff that I've worked on more recently. It's actually like a little bit more in line with the kind of music that I kind of enjoy making. So the last few films I've done have been a little bit more, I did an animation that was sort of like Gaelic. So there was like some traditional Scottish folky elements.
This animation that may have won an award recently?
It did. It picked up a Best Art Film at Film G and was nominated for Best Film as well, which was nice.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that was Lucy Keegan, who I worked with on that one. And yeah, she's an amazingly talented animator, and it's all hand-drawn, which is like by herself as well. So it's like a real painstaking process. Like I think she spent over a year doing all of the drawing, and it's like 4 minutes long. It's painstakingly done, and it looks beautiful. But this film I'm working on at the moment is from my friend Alice Viscat, and it's called Mercury. And it's a little bit more tonally like Black Mirror, slightly dystopian. And so I kind of get to indulge in some of the slightly more like dark ambient cinematic sort of sounds that I really enjoy to just sit and write with anyway. So I've been very much enjoying that process.
What kind of gear are you using on that one?
So the last month I've basically had a rough edit and a little bit of like stills and some footage, but I don't really like working on or like starting to actually work properly until I get a locked edit, because like so much can change that like it's actually, I find it way more difficult to have written something that has all of these timing cues and then you have to go through and change them all. It's like, it's really not how I enjoy to do it. So I basically said, I'm going to be working on some sketches and ideas and kind of getting a feel, because I can see the film, but I'm not actually going to start like putting pen to paper, so to speak, until I get the locked edit. So I've just kind of been farting about with Surge. So I think there'll be a few sounds in the film that are from that. I made a sound that my partner Phoebe described as one of the worst sounds she's ever heard in her life.
Wow, that's quite an accolade.
I know, I was like, success, nailed it. So I'll maybe pop a little clip of that in.
I think everyone would love to hear the worst sound Phoebe's ever heard.
Yeah, so she said it sounded like the world was about to end. So I was like, that's good. And then I watched Obsession recently, which was excellent. And there was quite a lot of like really big hits. So I took that Surge sound. We'll play a little clip of the Surge sound by itself, and then I'll also do like a little clip of like me adapting it to be like a slightly more cinematic hit as well, which was just adding some layers of like percussion and a big throbbing Super 6 bass line. And then Super 6 and Prophet X stuff for like the more tonal and melodic elements. I I recently upgraded the Super 6 that I have to the ST49.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
keyboard.
about this because I know you've recently, we had your synth in the building and Kyle was helping you swap out the keyboard for the new. So this is the upgraded polyphonic aftertouch keyboard for the Udo Super 6.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've always sort of been that guy who's like, polyphonic aftertouch? Who needs it?
Yeah. Who do you think I am? Some kind of professional keyboard player?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how to use these fingers. What are you talking about?
That's what sequencers are for.
Yeah, exactly. But as it turns out, it's bloody good, you know. I think the thing for me that is most impressive, I kind of had this a little bit when I first played the Osmos, and the Polybrute 12 as well, which has got a great like aftertouch, interesting integration on that, is like you almost have like two presets depending on how you play, and you don't actually really need to be that good of a keyboard player, as it turns out, to benefit from that. Like you can just sort of like be playing this thing quite softly, and then just by like leaning into it a little bit, you get these like really expressive tonal things. And I've been really surprised at how much it's like kind of taken it like to another level, I would say. Like I was a little bit reluctant to sort of like spend the money on the upgrade, but now I've done it. I like couldn't imagine going back to it before. So yeah, been really into that. So that's been, those three things are kind of forming the palette with a little bit of the slate and ash stuff as well. Because it's quite useful to have some stuff that's a bit more in the box and a bit more MIDI. And those things all sound like quite a bit more string adjacent and like slightly more like orchestral stuff that I don't have real access to otherwise. So yeah, at the moment it's kind of that sort of stuff, but it's the longest film I've worked on thus far. So it's going to be about 21 minutes because I've only really done shorts. So it's just going to be a bit more music to write, which is exciting, and there's quite a lot of tonal changes, so it should be pretty good. I'm really looking forward to kind of like, I've kind of just started as of yesterday. I got the locked edit. So it's kind of like that was my first night of like putting actual stuff down for it, and been enjoying that.
What's the process like in terms of like how much free reign do you have in this sort of setup? Because I know I've never done any kind of soundtrack writing or work before, but I've listened to various podcasts over the years with people that have talking about the the requirements of having to do umpteen cues in a very short space of time, and then having to change things very quickly when the edit's changing. And like you say, you've got the locked edit, which is obviously helpful. But at that point, have you got like a list of required cues to do, or how does it work from a kind of, how do you organize your workload, I guess? Yeah.
So the thing for me is I think I'm operating currently at a level that is like, I'm basically working with like, there's no studios or any other thing involved at this point. So like I'm basically just working directly with the director of the film.
Who is also the editor? And
oftentimes they're the editor. A few of the films I've worked on, there's a separate editor and there's a separate director, but like generally it's like, quite closely linked. And for me, it really depends on the director then, because some of them have like really strong ideas of like, I want music here, here, here. The last few have just been like, I don't have like, I don't want to restrict you by telling you where music should or shouldn't go. So you just do what you think is right, and I'll let you know if I like it or not. So at the moment I have for this film, like I haven't been told, I've not had any temp music put in. Like it's essentially like all I have is a film with just dialogue and like a tiny bit of like background noises and stuff, but it's not even like in the audio mix stage yet, so like it's literally just like the onboard camera microphones and stuff, or like I think maybe a little bit of boom mic. It kind of cuts in between those things, so it's essentially just an entirely blank canvas, which in some ways is a little bit scary, because then it's like I basically have to make all of the decisions of like, where is the music going. And there's also quite a few scenes in this where I feel like you could take it two different ways. Like you could either make it really deeply intense and like slightly horrifying, or deeply sad. And so for those scenarios, I'm probably going to do a version of both, and then be like, you can pick which you think is better suits what you were going for. But yeah, at the moment it's just like I don't really have any specific cues that I've been told I've got to hit. In some ways it's just like I'm going to go through all of the most obvious parts first, and do like a full pass of like, well, this scene definitely needs music and it needs to be like this. And then do a second round of like incidental scenes that could maybe benefit from a little bit of music.
Yeah.
I'm not going to work chronologically either, because I sometimes find that like if I was trying to just do the film from start to finish, I think it's easier for me mentally to kind of go through and do the scenes that I am like have really strong ideas for, because those ideas sometimes inform the incidental scenes along the way.
I was going to say you might end up with a theme that you then reference in other bits, and that kind of thing. Yeah,
I'd written a theme a few weeks ago, before I got even before I got the first rough cut. I'd written a theme. And there's a chance that I might still use it, but now that I've seen the film, it's going to be in the same key, because I think the key was right and that sort of thing. But I think it will be a slightly different version. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm still relatively early days in it.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good.
And I know what's been new with you. You've been moving.
Yeah, I've moved house finally after quite a protracted process, which was slightly stressful. But yeah, all done. So I have a new room for music stuff. So I'm in the process now of bringing all the bits that I'd put into storage back out, realizing I have far too many modular synthesizer modules.
No, you.
Yeah,
you have too many.
Yeah,
Incredible.
yeah. It's a terrible affliction that I have. So I'm going to sell a few things and try and streamline things a little bit. I'm going to take the opportunity to kind of like lay things out a bit differently than they were before. But yeah, it's kind of weird. I've got space which I need to have. It needs to be quite multi-purpose, because it kind of also needs to, this is like secondary concern, but it does also need to work as a spare bedroom in the property. But I also need to be able to film video stuff there. And I also need to use that room to like do soldering and DIY stuff for making synths, and do, just my usual, actual recording music and playing stuff. So I mean, it's a decent sized room and it's got a nice high ceiling, and it's, I'm looking forward to working in there, but I'm still figuring out exactly what the layout's going to be like.
I can imagine the three things in some ways aren't all like, they don't all coexist in a way. Like what makes a really usable studio might not necessarily be the most usable studio for something that you then have to film. And then certainly like, the soldering thing is essentially almost like an entirely different. There's no scenario where that fits into like the rest of the stuff.
No, I mean in my old house that was in a different room, and I've got like fewer bigger rooms now, if that makes sense. So I think I just need to zone it a bit. Use some room dividers or something like that to kind of demarcate the areas and make so it doesn't just feel like a big homogeneous synthesizer junkyard, which is what it feels.
They're
like
playing
the
classic Grand next Friday. I was going to ask you, now that you're kind of in that process of a rebuild, are you taking the opportunity to change how things were set up, or did you have it like, did you quite like how it was set up and it's just essentially like getting rid of some stuff, or are you going to do things differently? I'm
not going to do it that differently, because I sort of landed on we'll maybe touch on some of this a little bit later when we come to one of the listener questions, which was about how we record synths and modular and how we multi-track and stuff. So the kind of core of the setup is, I have a sound card, and I have a small analog mixer. I've got a kind of a vintage Tascam, and I've got patch bay, and I can kind of use, depending on how I patch the patch bay, I can work without using the computer at all, and I've got some outboard effects and stuff there, or I can use that mixer to send buses from Ableton into and just use it as a kind of analog summing mixer. So it's pretty flexible the way it works, and I'm going to keep that as the kind of core of it. So it's this kind of hybrid analog digital recording and jamming kind of setup. What I did have before was kind of like a few areas then with different types of modules. So I've got like a 4U corner, and then my kind of Eurorack zone, which wasn't really big enough for all the Eurorack stuff that I have. So I would just like move stuff in and out, and that's where I would film stuff as well. So I'm probably, I think it's going to be broadly the same, but with, I'm just going to try and streamline things a little bit, because I don't really need all the cases that I've got. And I think I'm going to definitely move to a thing where I just have one or two smaller Eurorack cases on the go at any one time, and I kind of just rotate things around a bit more, because it's my modular grid account is obscene.
You're definitely on the paid for version.
Oh yeah, I've got a unicorn account on that for sure. Yeah, I've had that for a while. I need more racks, because I always do. I don't know if you're not a big modular grid user, because you don't have a huge amount of Euro stuff.
No, I don't have any Eurorack, which seems which might be a bit sacrilege. But the decision for that was, I used to have a bunch of Eurorack, and I really like Eurorack, but working here and having an almost endless opportunity to just buy a new thing every month. I was like, this feels like probably shouldn't do it. And you got me into the Surge 4U stuff, which for me was the thing that was like most interesting about Eurorack was interesting patchable. Like I was kind of more interested in synths than I was like the sort of sound effects processory sorts of stuff. So yeah, I kind of went down that road rather than the tinkery, because the tinkerer in me would just endlessly.
Yeah, I mean the tinkerer in me does waste far too many hours with like copies of modular grid racks, saying, well, what if I did it this way instead, or what if I made this case a this themed thing? So, and I've actually I've got a bit better recent months at not spending too much time doing that, and I'm just trying to get a couple of cases that really work for me and try and work with them, and they're kind of a bit more like single brand focused and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing I've quite enjoyed in the whole process of moving, because I kind of moved everything into storage for a while I was kind of, just getting logistics sorted for moving. And I've now been moving stuff back out of storage again. But for a while, the only thing I really had to make music with for like 2 or 3 weeks or so was the Electron Syntact.
Yeah,
because we got a B-stock one in here, and I kind of I've always been a little bit intrigued by it because I've got the Digitact, and the Syntact is the one with the 4 analog drum voices and then 8 digital voices. And it's kind of a drum machine, but it can do some synthy stuff as well. I think you've described it as like the ugly duckling of the Electron range.
I just sort of feel like and I love an ugly duckling. I think the Prophet X was objectively the ugly duckling of the sequential lineup.
Yeah, you've got the sequential ugly duckling, haven't you?
Yeah, and in fairness, the presets on it were steaming garbage, but like when you actually dig into it, it's great. I think the Syntax for me always had that slightly ugly duckling thing of like, okay, well the Digitact is by far the better sampler because it didn't have sampling when it first came out, and now it's pretty limited. And the Digitone is like it's obviously not like the analog. It's not like a sort of traditional analog synth engine, but it was like if you're looking for a synth, the Digitone made more sense. And the Syntact was sort of like the hybrid of those two things that kind of didn't really feel like it did one or the other like tremendously like well at the time. But the way that you speak about it, it seems that like the analog drum voices are actually really, really good.
Yeah.
And that it really works for your setup.
Yeah, it does. I think it just the way I don't know, it just kind of appeals to the way I work, because I've always liked analog drums. I've had a Vermona DRM1. Which I kind of wanted to like a bit more than I actually did, if that makes sense. And, it's quite big. It takes up quite a lot of space. Kind of like half the sounds in it. And, the other half, I know it's really popular. And again, another controversial opinion maybe, but it's really, it's maybe not 100% for me. But,
Tom, it's not for me, Churchill.
Yeah. Watch sales tank again. No, I mean, it's a great machine, but, I was kind of looking for something a bit more, compact. But yeah, the Syntact has very good analog drum voices, really interesting digital engines as well. And yeah, you can use it to sequence external stuff. And I've just quite enjoyed, I guess, during this period of like flux that my studio's been in, just having one thing to play with and just trying to make little grooves with that as a groove box. And I've made a couple of sort of jams on that, which are actually pretty not far off. They don't need much more.
I am a big fan of like quite small self-contained things, in particular for things like killing time on planes and stuff like that. I love a little thing that I can just be like, I had the Dirty Wave for a while, the little tracker Game Boy thing. And that on a plane was like 10 out of 10. It's just zipping around. Like when you got quite used to the workflow.
I mean, that feels like a Game Boy or something, doesn't it? Because it's the handheld thing with your thumbs.
That thing is great. I really, really love that.
I think if I was sat next to someone on a plane who was using an Electron box with the clicky-clacky keys, it would do my head in.
To be fair, the keys clacked on the Dirty Wave as well. It's like, it's not as loud as the Electron, but it's still clacky.
The Electron was like sitting next to a typewriter.
To be fair, if I sat next to someone and they whipped out a typewriter, I'd be like, oh God, here we go.
So that's where I am. Basically, I'm going to just try and get back into. I've got various videos to make. We are going to be doing some more sort of short demo videos of new stuff that's come into the shop pretty soon. So there'll be another kind of like video series we're going to try and launch alongside the pod, which is a bit more gear focused. But on the subject of gear, is there anything that's come into the shop in the last couple of weeks since the last pod that has caught your eye that you wanted to mention?
Well, the one that I took home and will stay there is the Fairfield Circuitry Placeholder, which we had mentioned a few podcasts ago as being something I had my eye on.
So for the people that aren't familiar, can you describe what that is?
Yeah, it is a BBD reverb. So it is 3 bucket brigade delay chips in a early digital reverb algorithm configuration. So they kind of feed back on each other in quite a nice way. Mm-hmm. Tonally, it ends up in a really interesting space of sort of being, at times it sounds really like a spring reverb, which I've always loved the sound of spring reverbs as well. Like that's there's just something about that, especially on like certain types of synths. Like I think it's just because, the Buchla had one built in and that kind of thing. There's something about that with quite bright, buzzy synths that just really, really there's something about it I really love. And then sometimes it veers into like slightly more delay territory. But it's kind of like underwatery. It's like, it's really tonally very interesting. And we'll feature it in the little roundup video that we just mentioned that we'll launch. But I discovered that it will self-oscillate and it will feed back on itself. And I always really thought the Audrey from Synths Academy was really interesting for that. You can kind of do the sort of A24 horror film sound horrorscapes of like that sort of thing. But it will do that, which I was like quite impressed by. You just have the decay all the way up and then you can kind of play with the size and you can get these like really haunting, that I think might actually also end up on Mercury. A little bit of that is just like, it sounds really good as obviously as a reverb, but you can actually use it as a somewhat of a hellscape drone synth if you want as well, which was really interesting for me.
Yeah, cool.
And what about you? What has anything caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that came in yesterday, which I'm kind of excited to start using, is from our friends at 64 Pixels. Jason has released a banana-fied version of the CVOCD MIDI to CV converter. Now, this isn't quite as sexy as a BBD reverb pedal, but at this point,
so sure.
At this point in my musical career, I'm very interested in utilitarian problem solvers.
Yeah.
So this is like a banana output version of the CVOCD, which is a very configurable 4-channel MIDI to CV converter with extra gate outs and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to configuring that to work with my Surge stuff. I've got a couple of volt per octave tracking oscillators in there, which will be useful to be able to control with that, and also just being able to configure the trigger outs to be different divisions of the MIDI clock and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'll be able to kind of like sync things perfectly to, say, for example, the Syntact or the Digitact, just MIDI cable into there. Can do some sequencing of the Surge.
And there's quite a bit of configurability both on the unit itself in terms of like the voltage ranges, which I think with you working with Surge, you'll kind of have something of a set and forget. But am I right in saying that like you can kind of go via like an editor and do a bit more of a configurable setup?
Yeah, there's a web-based configurator thing which just generates a sysx file that you then pipe into it, which then you can define what all the different outputs do and what ranges they use and that kind of thing. Because it'll do volt per octave, it'll do Buchla style 1.2 volt per octave, and it'll do hertz per volt for Korg stuff as well. Yeah. And then you can set the gate levels to be 5, 10 or 15 volt and things like that. So it's in terms of MIDI to CV converters, it's quite a new. I mean, there aren't that many options for interfacing with banana gear without using a format jumbler. So it's quite nice to have an all-in-one thing. Yeah,
I will probably at some point borrow one of those as well. One thing that I thought it would actually be quite an interesting pairing, which is probably like a little bit more, not necessarily maybe using all of its strengths, because it's 4 CV outputs. And how many gate outputs is it? It's like
there's 12. Yeah.
More for the CV outputs, something like the the Oxy E16.
Oh yeah.
I've been tempted to try one of those.
This is the MIDI controller with 16 pots.
Yeah, the thing that you can do on that is it's really, really cool in that you just hit record and you can do like recorded automation on all of the pots, and it's all asynchronous.
Oh, cool.
I was thinking you could take those 4 CV outputs and configure them with CCs, and then you have knob recorder stuff for within the Surge. Could be quite really interesting.
Cool. Yeah,
and it's all asynchronous. You can have one that's like a really long loop and one that's a short loop.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. That sounds cool.
Because obviously that kind of stuff is not really easily accessible in like in Eurorack. You can get a CV recorder no problem, but like it's not really as much of a thing in the sort of banana-y for you world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm tempted by that.
Yeah. No, that's going to be good to try. And then I think the other thing that we've got in, and again, it's a utilitarian thing which doesn't really need a sound demo, but it's the Earthlink Modular Trails kind of output module, which they got in touch and sent me a prototype over a little while ago, and I've been using it quite a lot at home. So this is a 6-channel mixer with mute buttons and kind of cascaded normaling and stuff, and every channel also has a balanced 1/4-inch line output, and the mixes on the 1/4-inch bus are independent of the mixes on the 3.5mm bus. So you can take individual stems basically from those 6 inputs and go straight into your sound card to record stems, which again we might touch on a bit later with that audience question that we're going to come to. But you can also then have submixes to use within the system, and you can also just use them as simple attenuators. And so it's one of those things that's like really handy. There's always a use for it, and because it's 6 channels, you can kind of use 4 of them as a mixer and 2 of them as straight up attenuators or whatever you like.
Yeah.
And I'm just at this point again, I'm just a sucker for a really well made, nicely spaced, well thought out utility that kind of solves problems.
Yeah, it very much falls into the category of not sexy, but very useful.
Yeah.
You don't look at it and you go, oh, that I can't wait to get that. But like, as soon as it's in there, you're like, oh yeah, of course, this just made my life so much easier.
This just makes my life easier, exactly. Yeah, and it's a nicely designed thing. I mean, it's as sexy as that kind of module could be, I would say, which is good. And they've got their next thing is really good as well. It's going to be a pedal interface with stereo in out to take audio to and from external pedals, wet dry control with CV control over that, VCAs over the input and the output. It's also got a built-in LFO, and it's got a CV to expression converter for pedal expression inputs, and a built-in power supply for pedals. So all you really need is to run if you've got a nice pedal, you can power it directly from the module, run in and out in stereo, and control that wet dry mix and stuff. So there's quite a lot of options for that, but this is the one that's kind of has everything in one. And again, it's very well engineered and very high quality VCAs and stuff. So I'm trying that out at the moment, and I'll report back more when I've used it.
Excellent. Yeah, I kind of feel like all that sort of stuff is, again, it's just like anything that makes my life convenient and easier. I think we'll touch on this a bit more as we kind of talk about recording and workflow, but like I'm starting to really appreciate that. Like all of those things are worth a lot more than I think a lot of people pay attention to, I think. Yeah.
So shall we move on to some questions from the audience? We've had a few of these building up, so apologies if it's taken us a little while to get around to mentioning it. But we've sort of touched on a couple of topics here, which Wolf and Deer was asking via email, and that was kind of how do we record what are our approaches for recording our synths, whether that's multi-tracking or stem recording them.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think I've sort of mentioned briefly, my setup's this kind of analog digital hybrid thing with a patch bay and a sound card, and I tend to, when I'm recording stuff in the modular, try and record the individual stems for the ease of being able to kind of mix them down later. But then I'm usually working with a kind of rough mix, which I'm listening to as I'm recording, which is done in the modular. But then I take those individual channels into Ableton, and then I try and take them in without too many effects on, and then I can, if I'm trying to write a proper bit of music, I'll then kind of apply the effects in the box, and especially reverb and stuff like that. You don't want to. I'd try and record that without reverb baked in if I can, because it's easy to add reverb but quite hard to take it off again.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and one of the things that I have done recently is reconfigure my studio setup a bit. So prior to how I was working, essentially before I did this change up, was I had a very large pedal board with which everything was connected, and I would literally just unplug and go straight in. So all of the effects were baked into the recording. And for the most part, I kind of didn't mind that setup, because the way that I've been writing and the approach that I've been taking has been to be more in the moment, and almost like trying to capture like a whole performance in one go, and then not really mess with it too much after that. So I wasn't too concerned, because like it sounded good at the time. That's kind of what I'm happy with. And so I wasn't really too bothered. But when I started to think about how I wanted to integrate the placeholder, I was like, because that's mono, and a lot of the stuff I have is stereo, and I have a Therme that's also mono. I was like, it kind of maybe feels like this would be. I recently got a Motu Ultralight as well, which has tons of ins and outs, and I was like, this feels like an opportunity to maybe utilize that a bit more. So now how I have everything working is I record all of the synths. I've got the Ultralight, and as well as that, I've got one of the Audio Fuse X8 ins, so I've got more inputs via ADAT. My Super 6, my Surge, and the Prophet X, which are the three main things that I'm working with, they all get recorded dry. And then I'm using the I/O to then have different effects loops for individual pedals and different chains. And then that's all on external audio effects buses in Ableton. So it's a send effect that then goes to, rather than like, A reverb and B delay, it's like C, Chase Bliss pedals. And it goes through, the Chase Bliss pedals I actually don't have all separate. Like I've got 3 of those and they all kind of are just in one chain just because I don't have that much I/O. But like the Placeholder is on a separate one, and the Therme is on a separate one. And in doing this, I've realized that there's like quite a beautiful flexibility that it gives me, because I don't have this thing of like, I have to commit to a particular effect, and I don't have that effect baked in.
Yeah.
I can choose the level afterwards.
Yeah, that's the thing for me too. It's like something that sounds great in the moment with the effect, on. If you record it with that baked in, and then you realize the next day, actually, I really wish that reverb was a bit quieter in the mix, then it's much harder to undo that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I like about it as well is like certain pedals are a pain in the arse from a gain staging perspective. Anything with BBDs is like, you really, like, whenever I've used them when they're in the middle of a pedal board or in the middle of a chain, I'm constantly having to go and like turn down the synth and then turn it up at the other end and all of that sort of stuff. And I just turn the effects send down in Ableton and just choose the gain stage there. And all of that just means that like I get much more control and much more flexibility. And I love how the Placeholder sounds, and it actually does sound really nice when it starts to clip and distort as well. It's got like a really lovely character. But one other beautiful benefit of that is that Placeholder is obviously mono. I can basically record, and as I'm recording, record the Placeholder. So I've got like dry synth and then full wet reverb from the Placeholder. I've then been doing, for most things, I actually really like how it sounds in mono, but sometimes if it's like a sound that is almost like, I want this sound to be the focal point of the whole track, there are certain sounds where I'm like, if I do another pass and just tweak the settings on the Placeholder ever so slightly, and then essentially just record a separate track again through the Placeholder.
So with the same dry audio?
Yeah, dry audio, but just tweaked settings on the Placeholder, and then you pan those left and right. You then get the stereo Placeholder sound, which sounds really, really good, because it does have that character, and there's all the subtle slight differences in the timing, and because it's like slightly delay.
I bet even without changing the settings, it would probably sound slightly different, wouldn't it? With the kind of imperfections and stuff. Yeah. And the way that the way that, not to go into too much detail about the Placeholder, but there's like a size and a ratio, and the ratio is sort of how much of the feedback path stuff is happening, and then the size is almost like how long the delay time is. So you can actually kind of get similar tones by turning one up and one down. So it ends up sounding like slightly different, but there's enough of a tonal change that it doesn't sound, it's not like you have just the same thing happening twice. So you get that really wide, interesting sort of sound from that. And just all of that flexibility of then after the fact, I can kind of go in and change things and all that sort of stuff. It's been really, really useful to have that. And even just parallel effects chains, to be honest. I'd never really considered how useful that was, because it used to be Placeholder into the Chase Bliss pedals, and everything's running into it. Becomes a bit of a mush quite quickly.
And it's really nice to just be able to like, okay, I'm going to high pass that Chase Bliss pedal like delay line thing,
right. and that's not going to affect what comes after it.
It's been really, really useful, and kind of made the pedals and all of the effects that I had feel way more valuable as part of the workflow, and like actually like, oh, this is really, really beneficial. And also I just get to do it with any sounds that I have in the box. This drum loop that used to be a pain in the ass, like I would never send audio from Ableton out into effects pedals as well. It's kind of unlocked that aspect, because I could just never be asked to hook it up. But now that it's already configured on the sends, it's just so easy to do it and print.
Yeah, so I think I'm doing something in the same kind of ballpark, but less to do with effects and more to do with like running it through the mixer.
Yeah.
So I kind of like use it to add a bit of that analog mojo. I'll just like mix my 8 buses or 4 stereo buses through the 8 channels on this Tascam, and then I can EQ them on there as well. But you've just kind of inspired me. I think what I could do quite easily on the patch bay is like use them to run through pedals or I've got a quad reverb and I've got a few other bits of hardware, bits of outboard, which I tend, I sometimes run them when I'm just using the Tascam on its own and the computer's off. Mm-hmm. So I've got the quad reverb on a aux send, and I sometimes run the output through the warm audio compressor, the SSL style bus compressor. But I think the sort of hybrid approach where you're using aux sends via hardware, but from within Ableton, that's something I'm going to try and explore a bit as well. Because I'm starting to, I've got a couple of pedals now. Never really been a pedal person, but I bought that Fairfield Meet Maud delay, which is, been out for a few years now, but I picked up a second-hand one before we got the stock in. And I think that will work better as a send effect than as a through effect, because I've noticed the gain staging is particularly fussy on that one.
Yeah.
Like it's quite easy for it to go completely bonkers.
I sort of feel like actually, like it was only when I set it all up, I was like, I'm largely using, like I really quite like delay and those sorts of effects. And it was kind of only really when I started to do it on Sends, I was like, oh yeah, this actually is way better. Yeah. Like it just functionally is way better from a perspective. And I could also automate those sends as well. I could do all of that automation within the timeline and within the DAW, so that like, and also it's just the interacting with the pedal as it's happening. Again, like prior to that, if I was playing something in on the Super 6, for example, I can't then also be tweaking the delay and doing like weird delay sweepy stuff. So even just that, it frees me up to then be more interesting and more creative with those effects as well.
Yeah. Cool. So we'll go for one more audience question for this episode. Kythera asks on email, and apologies if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. They ask, what are the things you like to do in Modular that are hard or impossible to do in software?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because I think I get a lot of people coming into the showroom sort of talking about like, hardware versus software, and, that whole workflow thing is really, it's a tricky one to navigate. And for me, the things that I love about hardware is I don't ever really love time spent in the computer. There's something really meditative about the act of sitting down that I really enjoy, and like patching a synthesizer or just playing with something physical. Now, that is one side of the thing, but there are sort of like actual things that I find are much more difficult to do in a computer. And it's generally things that are off the grid. So like using the Surge, for example, where a looping envelope generator is my clock, and I can modulate that envelope to create these little weird shifts. Even things like just like a 5-step sequence. I know you can set I can set a grid in Ableton to 5, but it's the combination of lots of little things, and like, how I can choose to reset sequences and all of those things, where it's like, if we're excluding VCV rack, which is obviously just Eurorack in the computer, I find all of those things much, much harder to do in a traditional digital audio workstation. Are there other things that you have? Yeah,
no, I think that's the main thing for me too, is the kind of breaking off the grid and the timing stuff, like being able to do stuff that isn't kind of locked to a 16th note. I know there are workarounds for this stuff, but I find generally kind of interesting sequencing and polymetric stuff, and like a 7-step sequence at the same time as a 5-step one, and these are all things that you kind of can do in Ableton, but it kind of steers you away from it a lot of the time, or it doesn't steer you towards it in the way that Modular stuff does.
Yeah.
So I think generally, I think the more general thing for me is just that it's less about the specific stuff you can and can't do, because there is usually a way to do the same stuff in the computer, but it's how you get there, and it's the experience of doing it for me. It's like the user interface and the sort of process of getting to that point, patching cables and experimenting and playing around with stuff, versus having to open a plugin window and kind of like, well, how am I going to route this? And do I need to like set that to channel 1? And one other thing you mentioned, I think when we were talking about this beforehand, was like feedback patching and stuff as well.
Yeah.
Stuff like that is kind of much harder to root in a DAW, and without very quickly getting out of control. Whereas with analog modular stuff, it's the stuff you can do with feedback and different points in the patch as well, which is
this really was a thing for me, and almost like my first 6 months for the Surge were spent largely just kind of doing slightly more of the former things that we were talking about, like slightly weird sequences and like slightly jittery rhythms and stuff like that. And I remember sort of like being like, oh, what happens if I do the output into the input? I remember Tom talking about feedback patching, and that sounds quite fun. And exploring the sort of like the cusps that those things can sit on, and the non-linearity of all the analog circuitry is like really feels quite organic and rideable and interesting and like quite unstable in a really beautiful way. And while I know for a fact that you can do it in the computer, those things are typically more done in like a Max MSP patch than it is done in a digital audio workstation. And designing those patches is fun, and like that's a nice workflow. I don't really, again, it's more the practicalities of how you get there. Like there's just something about sitting in a computer that doesn't tend to light a fire in me in the way that like sitting in front of a modular synth and physically patching stuff does. The caveat to all of this would be that like I think you and me both have a very hybrid workflow when it comes to like almost like the hardware is the fun part. It's the exploration, and it's like where am I going to go, and like all of the sort of like the inspiration for the initial idea is usually done in hardware.
Yeah.
But God, I couldn't think of anything worse than trying to edit audio in a like if you were to completely move away from a digital audio workstation, you're like, no, I am going to go fully hardware.
Yeah.
The idea of like mixing audio, editing audio in like a more hardware only capacity, honestly is so unfun to me that I
think I'd be okay with the mixing side, but it's the arrangement side for me that I think that's the real strength of something like live, is being able to kind of,
But the mixing side as well is like,
I suppose it's so part of the arrangement now, is automation and stuff.
But for me, even the mixing part would be like, I need X number of EQs. Like it's all of that. It's like the little things that all add up for me that I think would make it just so much more of a unenjoyable experience. And also at this point, I'm so used to mixing in a computer. We've spoken before about like, we have certain go-to plugins and certain effects chains. Like I could probably try mixing in hardware if I had all of the stuff, but it's a lot. It's, the physical space required to also do all of that mixing is like a whole other thing entirely.
Yeah, if you wanted to have an equivalent hardware setup that's even a fraction of what you could do in Ableton in terms of like the number of EQs and compressors at your disposal and all the effects and stuff, it would get very out of control quite quickly.
Yeah.
I guess what I mean is I don't mind doing a kind of rough mix with a small format analog mixer.
Yeah.
I still quite enjoy that, or the kind of, when I'm jamming, kind of being able to sort of jam with a mixer and use, being able to kind of ride faders and EQ stuff as I'm going. But yeah, I think when it comes to actually finishing a piece off, we really are spoiled for like how much power we have at our fingertips for, finessing every second of that arrangement and automating everything and getting it, you can get it as perfect as you want.
Which can be a problem in and of itself.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the problem, is then going down the rabbit hole and endless tweaking and
Final mix version 7.
final.wav and all that. So I'm getting better at just kind of saying, well, that's done now. I'm gonna, and I'll sit with it for a bit, and then I'll maybe listen to it on a few different places, and I'll permit myself a couple of small EQ tweaks if I think that hi-hat's actually a bit too loud or something. I'll go back to that, but I'll try not to get too sucked into endless sitting, because you're right, the fun part is not sitting with a mouse, working out whether it's 12 kilohertz or 11 kilohertz that you need to do that 2.5 dB cut. It's and
I think as well, we've kind of spoken, or I've certainly spoken to people in the showroom about like the endless tweaking of a computer does lead you into this slightly horrible scenario where I sort of, at the moment, my goal is to almost try and work as quickly as possible to get to a final idea, or as close to a final idea as possible. Because if I come back to something like 6 months to a year later, like the original idea that felt incredibly exciting to me at the time I don't remember what that feels like 12 months later. And so the amount of times I go back in and I'm like, oh, maybe if I try a different melody over this thing, and maybe if I tweak this thing, it'll like sound a little bit more interesting. And then what I'm actually doing is just creating a new thing to be interested by, which was not in service of the original idea at all, and is now just a new idea that I'm in service of, which might be more interesting, but probably more realistically is actually not. And I'm just ruining an idea that was actually already good, and I'm just bored of it now because I've heard it 1,000 times. You know, so I'm wary of that as well with the endless tinkering and tweaking.
I mean, when I talk about endless tweaking in software, I mean, you can definitely endlessly tweak in Modular as well. You know, you can just be patching and
true.
I think what you said a second ago, like the key really with all this stuff is to, when if you hit on a good idea, try and just get it down as quickly as you can before you get bored of it and before you endlessly tweak it to the point where it's no longer any good. And I've learned all the best stuff I've done has been done pretty quickly. Like the tracks that really work are the ones where the idea comes, or you're doing a jam and you're just disciplined enough to kind of get an arrangement mapped out, a rough arrangement, pretty quickly, and you kind of know how it's all gonna play out and stuff, and then you can then go back and finesse the mix and stuff a bit afterwards. But I think if you just end up with a drive full of 8-bar loops, which you're maybe one day going to come and revisit and finish off, I mean, come on, no one ever does. You know,
the one thing, just to slightly disagree with you,
stop lying to yourself.
Who are you kidding? The one thing to slightly disagree with you when you sort of say you can endlessly tweak in Modular. One thing that I do find with Modular is, because it's physically patched, there is an end to that when I need to come back to another idea. I don't have that thing of like, with an Ableton session, I can make as many revisions as I want and I'll come back. Like,
you could have hundreds of them and you can load them all up and just pick up where you left off. With Modular, you do have to kind of commit to the patch.
And once it's done, once I've unpatched it, there's no getting that back. Even with the Surge, I think I've mentioned this to you, it's quite funny. Because of the instability of like takes 30 minutes or so to warm up and all that sort of stuff, like I've come back the next day to a sequence that I've not touched a single thing on, and it just sounds like a sort of carnival version, like a horrific, like detuned, carnivalized version of like the thing I was doing yesterday.
The elephants have escaped again.
But that's really actually like for me cemented something of like capturing something while I can. Because like I don't even have the luxury of like really stable Eurorack oscillators and all of that stuff. Because with Eurorack, I would usually be able to come back the next day and it was pretty much exactly the same. But with Surge, it's like, if I don't record this, like quite literally right now, this is lost forever and I'm totally screwed. That's kind of also helped with that, the desire in me. And I think it's kind of almost like one's fed into the other of like getting really interested in capturing things in the moment, is because I don't really have a choice with working with a Surge. Like, if I don't record it now, it won't be there tomorrow. So that has forced my hand to be a bit more like, okay, I'm going to just quickly bash something out here, and I can maybe come back and revisit it, like with, having all the separate, the Super 6s recorded separately and all that sort of stuff. But it really does force me to capture something there and then.
That's a good point. Even if you leave it patched, there's no guarantee it's going to sound the same when you fire it up the next day, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm very familiar with that. That's why I think when I started patching with the Surge, I was definitely a period where I was like recording every patch, just a snippet of it before, kind of as a document, that's a bit of a patch diary kind of thing. None of them are quite finished track worthy, but it's still quite fun to kind of just get to a point and think, okay, this is good, but if I don't record something now, I'll never be able to hear it again. So I'm just gonna grab it while I can.
I am tempted to, I think I mentioned this to you the other week, but I am tempted to, it's coming up to a year for me of using Surge, and I kind of am tempted to maybe do like a little farty Bandcamp release of like just the first 12 months. And some of them are more like quite finished tracks, and some of them might just be like somewhat interlude-y, interesting patches. But I'm kind of tempted to do it. It's just, I struggle to find the time. Like, I'm almost like so interested in making stuff. I always struggle with the actual release because the release part is so boring to me. But I feel like maybe if it's a Bandcamp release, it feels a little bit less.
You need an assistant. You need someone that can handle all this stuff for you.
That would be great.
If anyone out there wants to be Luke's intern, I'm not sure.
The pay is terrible.
I was going to say, I'm not sure what you can pay you, but we'll figure something out. Donuts maybe, or
we'll figure something out.
But yeah, well, that's probably
Yeah.
enough for one episode.
I know that's enough of us talking.
That's just us waffling on about this and that. I guess that's what podcasts are.
Yeah.
So thanks if you've been watching, if you've made it this far. Hope it's been moderately interesting. We've got a few plans for later in the year in terms of more special episodes and guests and stuff. Nothing we're quite ready to reveal as yet, but we quite enjoyed having Fletcher on. If you didn't catch the last one, go back and watch that. Fletcher from Forge TME talking all things CVOCD-X in the previous episode. So yeah, we'll do a bit more of that, and please do keep your questions coming as well. It's really good to hear from you, and it's good to have jumping off points for stuff to discuss. So yeah,
I think that's us.
That's us. Thanks again for watching, and see you soon. See you next time.
Bye.